Alright, my drawing is finished. I spread it. I could run my finger across the drawing and it will not smudge, which means it's ready for paint. So this next video will show the first two steps in the painting process. The first step is called a wash. You're going to need a great big old 2-inch brush over on the back counter in order to accomplish your wash quickly. A wash is very simple. All we're going to do is get a little bit of paint on our bristles. Okay, so about like that. We're going to put water in the brush. So I physically dip the brush into the water. I don't do any mixing on a plain sheet of paper or a mixing tray. I'll actually mix the paint and the water on my actual painting surface at the same time. And we're coating it. The whole point of a wash is to get a nice middle value over the surface. You don't want any white of the paper showing. Okay, so it should take like a minute to do if you're using a great big 2-inch brush. Please don't try to do a wash with a little tiny brush. It'll take you too long and you're just wasting precious time. Okay, so just coating one nice single coat and boom, I am done. The first step of painting is complete. Then you're going to move into your blocking in, which is the second step in the painting process. You're going to shift from a large 2-inch brush to a medium-sized brush. These are the long handles in the back. Just to show you a couple ones you could use. There's different shapes and sizes. Really, any of these brushes are fair game for blocking in. What you want to avoid when you block in is using the smaller bristles that are really smooth, which look like these. Okay, these are not used for a block in. This will be used for detail later on. We want to use the medium brushes. Now I encourage you to do a block in a single day. If you can try to complete it in one class period, that is your ultimate goal. So what a block-in looks like, if I take a look at my photograph or my object set up on the table, you're really looking on, or at each object, you're looking at the light section and the dark section. So this radish is nice and easy. The light section is like a yellow, the dark section is like a red. So I'm going to physically paint in each shape, the yellow shape and the red shape, and I'm done with the radish. If I'm looking at the leaf, I'm going to do the same thing, look at the light section and the dark section. So I'm going to paint in this lime green, that's my light section, and then this little dark strip, that's my dark section. On the corn shuck back here in the back, maybe this area here would be my highlight, my light section, that's my lighter version, and then the rest of it I'm going to paint this yellow color for my dark section. So you're really just breaking it down each object into two values, lights and darks. So what that looks like, if I put my photograph down, starting with my radish, I'm going to mix up the yellow, and it doesn't have to be perfect, you just want to get it as close as you can. It's okay if it's a little off. My wash is still wet. You can come right on top of that wet wash. Very loose, I'm using my medium brush, and I'm just focusing on the shape of that yellow piece. Okay, and that's done. That's all it takes. Then I'm going to do the same thing for the shadow. Now the shadow on the radish, which will go right here, was kind of a darkish red. So I'm going to grab some dark red, block in the rest. Very quick. I'm not worried about precise edges or blending or coverage. I'm just trying to get one light and one dark. Okay. Then I move to my leaf. I like to rinse my brush out in between. Even though my leaf is fairly small, I'm still using a medium brush. And I'm kind of squinting at my image to make it fuzzy, so I'm not focusing on detail. I'm only focusing on the color and the shape that color makes. Okay, so there's my highlight for my leaf, the light part, and the dark part kind of falls along this edge, just like so. Okay, so you can kind of compare it to what I'm looking at. Very, very simple. In fact, there might be a little dark right here on the leaf. Kind of blob that in. Right, then maybe I'll move to my corn shuck. So rinse out my brush. Okay, so I'll kind of show you what I'm doing. So the corn shuck is pretty white here in the light part, so I might just use a pure white. And I'm trying to get that shape, so it's kind of like a pointy V, about like that for my highlight. And then my shadow, or the darker section, is a little bit more brown and yellow. So I'm going to mix up kind of a browny yellow. And you can use your color wheel to help you get your colors. And the rest of it will be my brown yellow. Very, very loose. It's okay if the drawing's a little different than the picture. There's the shadow part of the corn shuck. And then I wanted to kind of wrap this corn shuck around. I know that doesn't show here in the image, but I'm going to pretend like it does because I think it'll make a nice bend on that corner and help the movement. There we go. Okay, so my corn shuck is done. I'm going to do the same thing for the cup. So I'm looking at this highlight here, and then the rest will be shadow, which might be kind of a lightish blue. And then it's a little bit lighter on the inside left, and then it gets darker as it moves to the right on the inside of the cup. So that's my next object. Working fast. Okay, so it's lighter right here. Now you can see as I'm mixing this in, a little bit of my wash is picking up and it looks a little bit red. I don't know if you can see that in the video. That's okay. All right, don't worry if the wash kind of pollutes the color just a teensy bit, because everything we're blocking in right now, we're going to come back over it anyway. We're just getting an underpainting. It's kind of like drawing with paint is what we're doing. So I'm only focusing on my highlights, and the rest of the cup is actually a little bit in shadow. So I'm going to use a little bit of a blue to show the shadow. So one highlight, one shadow. One light part, one dark part. Nice and quick. Don't worry about blending. You know, these brush strokes you're seeing are perfectly fine. The biggest mistake people make when they start painting is they start with a really tiny teensy brush and they focus on details right off the bat, and their painting takes them 10 times as long because then they have to go back over and redo a lot of what they did when they have to go through an adjustment layer, which is the next step. Okay, so you can see everything's getting blocked in pretty quick. The only things left to do are my rulers and then the walls and the floor. So my ruler is really dark. If I put my image back up on here. The ruler still has a light section and a dark section, even though it's a pretty dark colored plastic. So perhaps for my highlight, I don't go all the way to white. Maybe I use like a gray. So there's my shadow, and then my highlight is still going to be a little bit lighter, but not white. So that might be my highlight for my ruler. And then there's like a little metal pole here in my image. Kind of stroking a little bit of my line for that. And then there's like a bolt on the ruler that sits about right here. Kind of blob that in so you can kind of see what I'm looking at. Here's that pole, and then the bolt is what I just blocked in. Okay, very simple. Okay, then the last thing I have to do are these walls and the floor. Now when you do the walls and the floor, pay attention to cast shadows. So the cup down here is blocking a little bit of light. The radish leaf is blocking a little light. Some of the ground is really bright where the light hits it. The walls usually will have a gradation. It'll go from like light to dark or dark to light as it goes up. So you want to pay attention to the variations in the wall and the floor and just block those in very generic. This part is important to do. You don't want to skip this step, because what will happen as you start to block in your walls and your floor is you might lose some of the edges of your objects. That's very, very common if you're not very careful. And we want to know where those areas are that are going to get lost before we move to the next step. So if I come in here and put in a little bit of gray for the floor, you'll already notice that the floor and the cup are very similar in value right now, which is something we're going to have to adjust later. Okay, same thing here. This is pretty close. So you don't want to wait to put in your floor and your wall until after your objects are done, because it'll create lots of problems for you in the end. Okay, so block it in now. Get that wall in, get the floor in. Okay, so this back wall is a little bit darker. Looking at my objects. I am putting a little blue to it because it's in shadow and it's a little cool, which makes a problem right here. Right, they're very close. So I'm gonna have to fix that later. Okay, I'm not fixing it now. I'm only going to step back and look at it once all my red wash is covered. Okay, and then there's some wall up here. I'm almost there. So you can see how fast this goes. It's very, very quick. There's a seam in my wall right there. And then it gets a little bit darker. Okay, so this is what I'm kind of looking at, the seam in the wall. It's a little darker near that seam. And then it fades out. There we go. And my blocking in is done. Okay, every object has a light and a dark. Everything is covered. There's no red wash showing through. Everything has a second coat of paint, and I am done with my first 2 steps of painting.